This is BBC News, the headlines. Relaxing the rules from Monday, fully vaccinated travellers from the United States and the EU will no longer have to quarantine when they arrive in England, Scotland or Wales. They will still have to present negative COVID tests. Thailand, South Korea, Malaysia and Japan have all reported the highest daily number of cases since the beginning of the pandemic. The Delta variant is being blamed for the surge in cases. Nearly 28,000 new COVID-19 cases have been reported in the last 24 hours across Britain. That's an increase of over 4,000 and the first rise in the daily total after 7 days of falling cases. Prince Charles unveils a national memorial in honour of all the British police officers who've died in the line of duty. Hello and welcome to our look ahead to what the papers will be bringing us tomorrow. With me are Sienna Rogers of Labour List and Katie Balls from The Spectator. Well, tomorrow's front page is now starting with the Metro, which leads on the changes to travel rules that have come into place today, with double jab travellers from the US and EU countries no longer having to quarantine on arrival in England from Monday. Staying with travel, the Telegraph focuses on the US, quoting the Transport Secretary as expecting the US government to lift curbs on UK travellers. The Eye also looks at international travel hope, saying that destinations like France and Italy could soon be accessible for British travellers. Looking at the Olympics, the Daily Mail features a picture of Charlotte Dujardin, who became Britain's most decorated female Olympian today after winning her 6th medal with a bronze in dressage. The Guardian leads on climate issues with an exclusive story that claims the Queen's lawyers secretly lobbied Scottish ministers to change a draft climate law that would affect her private land. And don't call me grandma. The Times reports that calling a colleague a grandparent could break age discrimination laws, even if they are one. So let's begin. Let's start, shall we, with the front page of the Metro with this great big headline, doubly jabbly, which upsets me slightly, actually, because it's neither a rhyme nor alliteration. I don't quite get it, but anyway, there we go. And this, of course, is about the story that people from the EU and US can come to the UK without quarantine if they're fully vaccinated. Katie, you impressed by this?
I think it's interesting because we had a so-called Freedom Day last week, which was the lifting of nearly all legal restrictions domestically, at least. And yet, despite this, the actions, there seemed to be quite negative mood music coming from the government. There was worry about how chaotic it might be. And we're now at a situation where cases are not rising in the way that had been predicted. And I think it's giving the government assurance and some confidence. And the announcement today that there'll be no quarantine from the EU and US if you're fully vaccinated, and also confirmation to a degree, or at least very likely, that from next month, from the middle of August, if you are double vaccinated, you won't be told to self-isolate really, or to have a test if you come into contact with someone. I think it's a good indicator that the government is feeling much more positive about where things are going in terms of this pandemic.
Sienna, Labour saying that it's reckless to do this. Do you agree?
Yeah, so Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner certainly today was saying she's expressing kind of real concerns about this. And I think Labour is particularly pointing out that the US doesn't have kind of one uniform system of vaccine certification in the same way that we do here because of the NHS. Over there, kind of every state is different, and perhaps there's the possibility even that their papers could be falsified because it literally is just pieces of paper as opposed to kind of the NHS app that we've got. So there are those kind of concerns that the Labour Party is raising. I mean, I think Labour generally on this international travel during COVID issue really spies a kind of opportunity for the Labour Party to be tougher than the Tories on something that relates to border controls, which is obviously quite unusual for the Labour Party. And I think they're doing this because it's actually a way of talking about tough border controls, tough border measures, without actually causing any kind of big backlash from within the party. Because on the Labour left, they've actually been pushing for tougher restrictions throughout the pandemic. So I think there's a bit of there's some internal reasons why the Labour Party thinks this is quite a good idea, as well as obviously appealing to the kind of public mood, and the public are generally in favour of tighter restrictions at borders.
Interesting. Katie, I wonder where you think this, what do you think about the situation with France, which is of course an outlier because it's got its own category, it's Amber Plus, and so travellers from France won't be allowed to skip quarantine, not for the moment anyway.
And it's an interesting situation, but we're also hearing reports, rumours, some reports tonight that in a few weeks or in a week or so's time, France could actually find itself have the rules relaxed. And it could be the case that those Brits travelling to France aren't going to have that anymore. Now, it's not confirmed yet, but I think what's interesting is clearly, as we just touched on, when it comes to the government's reopening, variants are a big concern. I think they're particularly worried about the South African variant and the fact that they weren't sure, particularly the Oxford vaccine works that well against it. But I think looking at what's happening in various countries, I think there's some reassurance in government at the moment that maybe it isn't such a threat in terms of how it spreads. So I think that's one to watch. But I think international travel is a risky thing. And for some of the reasons Deanna just outlined, is risky politically. Because there are lots of people who do want to go on holiday. But if you look at all the polling, and there's also lots of people who want to see their family who live abroad, it's worth pointing out. But all the polling suggests that there is a majority opinion that is quite sceptical about prioritising relaxation of borders over the domestic economy, which means it could be a good thing to do if it works. But if it doesn't work, if there is some variant, you can completely see why Keir Starmer and Labour think there is an opportunity to be had there.
Really interesting. So that split is slightly characterised in the papers today. Let's go to the Daily Telegraph, which is sort of keen, if you like, to see things open up. The headline, US urged to scrap travel ban on Britons, because Britain is lifting its travel ban, meaning travel without quarantine, but the US is keeping its. Sienna?
Yes, that's exactly right. So we on Monday are saying anyone who's double jabbed, travelling from the EU or the US from an amber list country, we're going to recognise their vaccines, that any vaccines that aren't administered by the NHS, if they're valid there, we can recognise them now. That's going to be the change. Although they still do have to test negative before arriving and then take another test on the second day that they're here. And that's coming into force on Monday. However, it's not reciprocated yet. So this is kind of, I mean, they're saying, there's a quote here saying everyone is lobbying the Americans left, right and centre, from a diplomatic source there to the Telegraph. So, you know, they're saying ministers are over there, everyone is kind of piling in and saying, look, you've got to reciprocate this move. And obviously, you know, it's been very tricky for lots of business leaders to be able to go about their business. And I think, you know, that's obviously going to be a major focus for the government, trying to make sure that Joe Biden and an administration that perhaps they're not particularly close with and really need to strengthen those ties actually reciprocates on this.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because this is a stark illustration of the way in which the pandemic and the vaccination programme are going at different rates in different countries. So, Katie, in the US, we hear that just around half of the adult population is fully vaccinated. That is rather less than in the UK, and maybe that is contributing to the US's hesitancy in allowing Britons to come without quarantine.
Yes, I think if you look at the state of the pandemic in various countries, you have a situation where I think a few weeks ago, a month or so ago, the US felt it was in quite a strong position, but they started to see the Delta variant rise in cases. And that means that the issue of those who have chosen not to get the vaccine is becoming of increasing concern. I think what's interesting here, though, is when it comes to why the UK is not being added to a reciprocal list, I think there are a few things to be put down to this. I think there is a sense that if you are going to have special travel corridors, you want to do this in a egalitarian way. I think that's a US perspective. But I also think it's the fact that the Delta variant is so prevalent now in the UK. If the US is worried about the Delta variant, which they clearly are in terms of the health warnings, in terms of the messaging coming from politicians, I think it's a tricky time to open up travel to us. I think politically as well as in terms of public health.
Sienna, can we go to the front page of the Times, because this its main story is the other end of the argument: fears over health risk from amber travellers, and they have a quote that this move to open up the border to foreign travellers, some foreign travellers, poses a clear public health risk. I can't quite see who is making the claim.
So they said that ministers on the COVID-19 operations, the COVID-O committee, were told that this move posed a clear public health risk. And obviously that's quite a stark quote there. I mean, it's, as we were just talking about, obviously cases, we know, have been falling every day for a week. But today it went up again, only very slightly though. Overall, they're still falling, which is very encouraging. However, obviously the opening on July 19th, that there's a lag after that. We don't quite know the effect. And then opening up the international travel, kind of relaxing those restrictions on Monday, then there's going to be a lag again, and we don't know quite kind of what effect that's going to have, especially in terms of variants. So Boris Johnson himself is saying that, the data is encouraging, but he said today it's far, far too early to draw any general conclusions. So he, again, is definitely warning people that everything can't just relax. They're still worried about it, still got to be cautious. So it's always kind of walking that tightrope. And obviously, as we said, kind of the Telegraph has got one take saying, US has to scrap their travel ban that they're imposing on us. And the Times, on the other hand, is saying, well, there's this massive health risk from relaxing these restrictions. So it's always going to be this kind of lose-lose situation, basically.
Let's move on to a different story. The front page of The Guardian, Katie: Queen's lawyers secretly lobbied ministers for climate law waiver. What's this about?
This is really interesting. So this is a Guardian exclusive about special access used to gain an exemption, they allege, from an emissions initiative. And this is documents FOI, and the exemption in question means that the Queen is the only person in the country, so in Scotland, not required to facilitate pipelines related to emissions. And I think it's interesting for a number of reasons. Clearly, in terms of as we head towards COP26, what's happening with the environment agenda, and I think it's going to become increasingly of political debate in terms of who should carry the burden. So I think any stories that are one role for them are going to be tricky. But also I think because this is one of a series of pieces by The Guardian looking at exemptions for the royal household, and I think that is casting a light on something that often we wouldn't have seen previously.
Really interesting. Sienna, can we go to the front page of the Daily Telegraph? We've had a summer of really extreme weather globally, haven't we? And this is a story about building in the UK on flood risk land to be barred to prevent climate change from wrecking homes.
Yes, I think this is a really interesting one, and it does relate to the last story that Katie was just talking about as well, because the climate agenda, it doesn't seem urgent to a lot of people now. We have seen in polling that people do put it fairly high up their kind of list of priorities, but really when things like flooding happens, that's when it starts shooting up, because it becomes incredibly real to people living here in Britain. And I know that, in London, I've never seen such extreme weather as I've seen over the past few weeks. It's been shocking. It goes from incredibly uncomfortably hot, which is made worse by the pollution, to unbelievable amounts of rain. And I know that everyone, in my area, there's been tons of people, everyone in a basement flat basically has been flooded and has like sewage in their flats. It's absolutely awful. So this is and we've had this year after year in other parts of the country. So this makes the climate emergency very real to people. So here they're talking about how developers are going to be barred from building on land at risk of flooding. And the government is going to announce plans to invest 860 million in 1,000 flood defence schemes this year. There's going to be improvements to flood insurance. So there's all these various measures, which I think are incredibly urgent. But I guess the wider thing is the government needs to stop just setting incredibly ambitious targets for reaching net zero and all of those kind of things, and actually start setting out policies to reach them.
Katie, can we stay with the front page of the Daily Telegraph and just look at the photograph? This is of Boris Johnson with Prince Charles at the unveiling of the memorial to fallen police officers. It's wet, it's windy, they've captioned it "Folly with a Brolly," and presumably this is the sort of photograph that Boris Johnson thinks does him no harm at all.
Yes, this is the Prime Minister trying to master an umbrella, and it hasn't quite worked out for him. But as you say, it's been interesting. I think that photo has been doing the round in Tory circles, and actually a lot of people coming back and saying, well, this is why people like the Prime Minister. No, we can debate with that, but I think there is a sense that it is seen as a classic Boris Johnson gaffe, which perhaps makes him relatable or makes people question if a man who can't use an umbrella should be making some of the decisions he is.
Moving swiftly on, let's go to the front page of the Daily Mail and a fantastic photograph of Charlotte Dujardin, who has become Britain's most decorated female Olympian yesterday. And it has to be said, doesn't it, Sienna, that after months and months of very sobering, grim news, the Olympics are putting a smile on people's faces.
Yes, definitely. I think it is bringing some joy. The fact that, we've had such an incredibly strong showing at the start of the Olympics is pretty impressive, really. And obviously we had that kind of Euros experience of everyone being very, very joyful until that last match, that final. But people still were incredibly proud of our England team. And then they've got, even more reason to kind of be interested in sport and be proud of the people representing the country with the Olympics. So it's good news.
Katie, do you think that we get very absorbed in the personalities and their histories and their particular struggles when it comes to the Olympics? Because there's so much focus on the individual athletes, isn't there? Unlike in, say, the Euros, where it is much more of a team effort.
Yes, I think so. And there's obviously athletes who have been in previous Olympic Games competing now. But also, the other day I was watching the female gymnastics, and even if you've never really read about those people previously, you just can't get drawn in. And it's quite clear from just watching briefly how much effort these people have put in, and then also just their emotion when it goes right or wrong for them. But as I think Sienna says, it's one of those things where we've had the Euros and now we had the Olympics. And I do think, despite the fact there's no crowds and they're having problems in that sense, and there's questions in Japan over, I suppose, the wisdom of proceeding the games, I think on a global spectrum, they are bringing lots of joy to people's lives on a daily basis.
And Sienna, the achievement of Charlotte Dujardin has to be really celebrated, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely. I'll be completely honest. I can't say that I've been watching loads of the Olympics because I'm not going to sacrifice that much sleep. There has been a bit of an issue about, the times at which they're shown. So I can't claim to have watched all of it. But yes, and I think everyone today has been talking about the Simone Biles story, the fact that, she has said that because of her mental state, she can't carry on with the gymnastics. And, that's been a really interesting story as well. The fact that she's got the twisties, as they are known, which I didn't know about until today.
Yeah, it is interesting, and she is the third, superb athlete and young woman to have come out in recent months and talked about mental health. We've had Naomi Osaka and we've had Emma Raducanu at Wimbledon as well, talking about the pressure that goes with being a top sportswoman. Let me take you to the front page of the Times. Eye-catching headline in the corner here. Don't call me grandma. It could break age bias laws. Katie.
Yes, this is calling a colleague a grandparent can be age discrimination, even if they are a grandparent. And this is a recent ruling, and this is after a woman by the name of Anne Dobson sued her employer over comments relating to this. And I think it's an interesting one, because I think the Times has a thunderer, so in their opinion section, suggesting that actually, if you are a grandmother, you should be able to call a grandmother. But I think we start to get into a debate probably about the connotations, the tone. Is it ageist? Is it used in a positive way? Because obviously, I think you should be able to call someone what they are, what they can be described as. But you can also have negative connotations within that.
So the context is that the woman, a member of staff, wrote a car review in which he described a car as comfy wheels for a grandmother, and that was a reference to her. Sienna, what do you think?
I think, I mean, the story may be slightly undermined by the fact that the tribunal actually ruled against the claim that she brought in, because they decided that they kind of found that the comment was an isolated incident, which suggests that you kind of there has to be a bit of a persistent campaign of kind of being negative about the fact that someone's a grandmother in order for that to kind of count as discrimination, possibly. So I would note that. I don't think that it's wrong to point out that someone's a grandmother, obviously, but I guess the kind of concern is about what that means and why it would be used as an insult. I think, it should be a point of pride. It makes me actually think of Angela Rayner, Labour's deputy leader, who is affectionately called Grandula because she's a very young grandmother, and it's quite a cool thing to be.
OK, fascinating. Sienna, Katie, thank you both very much indeed, and we'll do it all over again very shortly. Well, that is it for the papers. And as I said, Sienna and Katie will be back in just over half an hour to look at more of the stories being covered by newspapers and websites here. Goodbye for now, and next, it's sport.
Good evening. She said she couldn't believe it, but Charlotte Dujardin has overtaken rower Dame Catherine Granger as Britain's most decorated female Olympian of all time.